I'm Deidre Petrina, and we're here with Ross McCabe, Helen McCabe's youngest son. So, Ross, how many siblings do you have?
There are two of us, my brother and myself, John, Scott, and myself.
Good. And I understand that both of you have a doctorate?
Well, yes, my brother is a medical doctor, he's a surgeon, and I'm a psychotherapist with postgraduate training. I'm a social worker training.
Oh, okay.
But I've gone on for analytic training in New York City.
Great. So, also, I understand that your mom also had her doctorate.
Yes, my brother, in fact, I think probably in the Ellensburg Daily Record there would be some sort of story because they both finished their doctorates in the same year.
Oh.
And so I think, remember, there was a story about Helen McCabe and John Scott McCabe finished their medical, and she finished her PhD from the University of Indiana, I believe in 1971 or 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that was pretty unusual for a woman to have her doctorate.
Yeah, she was a pretty unusual woman. She went through a very difficult time in terms of the marriage to my father not working out. We lived in California in 1956 in a small town called Coalinga. And the marriage ended and she moved back here, or up to Ellensburg. She graduated from Washington State University over in Pullman with a bachelor's degree in recreation and in physical education. And that was she was teaching in California, elementary school. And when the marriage ended, my brother and I and she wanted to move back to Washington State because that's where she had grown up. She grew up in Mount Vernon, and was one of 5, the youngest of 5 children. Her father was a retail dry goods and household goods and clothing store, and she helped out there, but was always very active in the hills and the mountains surrounding Mount Vernon. And she wanted to always return to Washington. She loved Washington. She would talk about it, and her eyes would glisten. She just and the names of all the places she was, and she was skied at Mount Baker when she was a child with bearskin. She put bearskin strips on the bottom of skis, and so she could climb up the hill and then ski down. So she introduced my brother and I at a very young age to skiing. We both loved skiing when we were living here, but we moved back to Washington State, Ellensburg, when she got an assistant professorship at Central Washington State College, it was then called, in the physical education department. So that was in 1956. And we lived on, I forget the name of the street, up near the junior high school, Morgan Junior High School.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's still here or not.
It is.
We lived right two doors down from the old Coca-Cola bottling plant, which is a tiny little building. And they bottled Coca-Cola in little tiny bottles. And
I didn't even know that there was a Coca-Cola bottling plant here. That's interesting.
Well, I don't know. I don't think it's here now, but
no, it's not.
Maybe it was a distribution, but I think it bottled. I think it had some.
Okay.
It was, and behind the little house that we lived in, we had a little 2-bedroom house, and behind the house was a creek, which every spring flooded, and it was all kinds of that kind of dilemma. I was right down the street from Morgan Junior High School, and my brother was then in the 9th grade. I was in the 7th grade in 1956. So we came back, and all of us kind of immediately fell in love with Ellensburg. It was the kind of community that was very welcoming. People were lovely here. We immediately made friends and connections here. We had moved quite a bit, or quite often, when my father and my mother were together. I was born in Seattle. My brother was born in Spokane, or no, in Pasco, and my father and mother moved around quite often. My father worked for a variety of companies and finally settled after a number of years teaching. But So we had moved quite often, and finally we came back to Ellensburg, and my mother really wanted to have roots, and she really loved it. And nearby were family. She had a brother and a sister-in-law in Ephrata that she was very comfortable with. She was very friendly with her former in-laws, my grandmother Edith, and my father's sister Mary all lived in Seattle. So we were in Seattle all the time. We were in Ephrata. We went skiing. This was home.
Yeah.
And it really came back to mean home to us, my brother and I. So Ellensburg really became the kind of the route that we connected to, and my mother really flourished here.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, she really came alive and found the college a welcoming place. She struggled through her master's degree. She had to get master's, then she had to get a PhD, and she started her master's in 58, a couple of years after she got back. Was going back over to WSU to get her master's degree, and had us babysat. Of course, we were 14 and 16 when we didn't believe we needed babysitting, of course. But she had college kids come in that she knew. She was always bringing in college kids to help out and do things and participate with her in the variety of things. She just loved being around young people. It was just, she was kind of a magnet to everybody. And to the college kids that she taught, they become friends with her. I'm sure that there are groups of young, no, not young people, but now middle-aged and old folks out there that remember Helen and the party she used to have up in her backyard up when we finally moved up in 1950. It must have been 1958 or no, maybe 59, 60. We moved up to Franklin Street up on Craig's Hill, which was
that's really a fancy place.
And she was very excited about being able to buy a home, and we got this home on 1109 Franklin Street, and she loved that house up there, and she was in heaven. She just loved the students that she worked with, loved the professors that the town took on her, and we were, my brother and I were kind of cranky at times as teenagers, not always participating in the community in the way the community would like us to participate in. But at any rate, we stumbled through. Both of us graduated high school and carried on in our own lives. After my brother graduated in 60 and I graduated in 62, by 64, 65, both of us had begun to leave. My brother and I went to college in Salt Lake City, where my father lived, for a year. Then I went to college in Mill Valley, north of San Francisco, when my father moved there. My brother stayed at the University of Utah, finishing his couple degrees there before he began his medical training. Actually, he was training for a master's degree in anatomy at the University of North Dakota. I didn't like college very much, and in 1995, dropped out of college and decided I had to go east, and I went east, and I've been living there ever since. And not 95, excuse me, not 95. Kathy says, yes, 65. I'm dating myself here. At any rate, my mother stayed here. We always came back whenever we could. The transportation was a little more complicated then than it is now in terms of expense, but my brother and I always felt, and have always felt, that Ellensburg was kind of home. And my mother's roots here were really deep, and she just loved the whole state. I mean, she just, I think, she used to tell us about things she would do during this fall, the early August, September. She would get this was back, I guess, in 60, must have been 67, 68, 69. She developed a bachelor's degree program for, and this is kind of my impression. I don't really know how accurate this is because it's my memory. But the memory of it is that she began to develop a program for Parks and Recreation Administration. And wanted to develop a bachelor's degree program.
Okay.
Well, the college apparently supported her for that, and part of that program was getting the young people that wanted to have a bachelor's degree in that program had to sign up to travel around the state with my mother in a van or in a couple vans. And they would travel around the state to see all the people my mother knew all over the state that ran various community recreation programs or state parks. And they would visit they'd spend 3 weeks on the road in these state vans, driving from town to town, sleeping on the floors of gymnasiums and out in the yard, and my mother just loving all of it. She just was so excited about this. She would tell me, "Oh, I'm off to see the state with the kids from Central, da 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 da." And she was all the time. My brother and I were at that point. You know, I was drafted in the military in 1966. My brother was doing his medical training. Both of us had begun to develop our own lives, and would come back and would communicate with my mother at various times, and she would tell us what she was doing, but we really didn't have a hands-on. But we would meet all these people that had hands-on connection. Oh, your mother, oh, you know, we love doing this with your mother, and they would all kind of rave, and we knew she was spectacular, but we were doing our own thing, so we were not paying as much attention to her as we sometimes wish we had.
Sure.
But at any rate, she continued to work here and finished her master's degree, and then in late, I guess, 68, 69, late 60s, she realized she needed a PhD, so she went to the University of Indiana and started her PhD work there. And
so she left Ellensburg.
To begin, I think she was given a sabbatical or whatever it was.
Okay.
The Central supported her going to the University of Indiana.
Gotcha.
She was given a leave of absence or something. She went out and did the coursework for a couple of years, lived in Bloomington. I visited her a couple times. In fact, once I visited her, I was in the military, so it must have been 67.
Okay.
So she was doing this in 67, 68. And going through her coursework for her PhD, and then finished her coursework probably 68, 69, and then came back and spent 2 or 3 very difficult years finishing her dissertation, which was really complicated for her.
Yeah.
She really struggled with it, but she, like everything she did, once she got a hold of it, she just kind of persevered and finally finished. And I think she graduated in 71, along with my brother finished his medical training in 71. So the two of them were, as I say, I think favored by the local newspaper, the Daily Record, with which both my brother and I delivered earlier in our lives. And so so the two of them graduated from their PhDs. My mother then returned and began in earnest this development of a bachelor's degree program and promoting that, and then began to expand her horizon. And here I'm really walking away on a limb in terms of I don't really quite know all of the details, because she was very actively involved in it. As I say, I was 3,000 miles away at that point, living in New York City. I've lived in New York since 1966.
Wow.
And I love it there. It's my home.
Mm-hmm.
But she began to reach out beyond Ellensburg and Central Washington, and I think became the president of the National Recreation Association in 1972, 3, 4, something like that, and became very well known, at least as I understood it, in terms of recreation, and particularly in the state, in Washington State, and was familiar with all kinds of people in the state government. Henry Jackson she was familiar with on a first-name basis with. She was in legislatures, and she was back and forth to Olympia promoting the use of public lands for recreation in the state of Washington. That was her thing. In fact, I think that's what her dissertation was.
I believe it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was.
I've read parts of it.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you're further
not the whole thing, but I have read little bits of it. Yeah.
Well, I think that was brought to the state government to try to be used as a guideline to to how they would develop state lands for recreational use. And I think that was what she had talked about and planned on doing. Unfortunately, in 73 or 4, 75 maybe, December 74, maybe January of 75, she slipped and fell on the sidewalk outside of her house, and broke her hip. And at that point, arthroscopic surgery hadn't been brought in. They were just beginning to do hip replacements. And she went over to Seattle and had a hip replacement which didn't work. She was laid up for some time, went through a terrible time in 75, and finally got her hip, the second operation worked, got herself off. She became addicted to pain pills. She got off that.
That's difficult. A
Yes.
lot of people have a hard time doing that. So.
Yes. And my cousin Barb, who was my mother had 4 siblings. The oldest was Harold. Harold was married to Louise. Louise and Harold were 10 years older than my mother, and they really took Helen under their wing when she went through the divorce, and were always there. And Louise was this immensely caring, supportive person to my mother, and her daughter Barb. So Harold and Louise had 3 children. One of them was Barbara, and Barb still lives in Seattle. She's 78. She couldn't be here today. She wanted to come along, but she is involved in a bunch of activities, one of which is cutting on horses.
Oh.
Yeah, and so she does that very actively. Still today.
Wow.
Yeah, in
That's
fact, she's
impressive.
going to some competition this week.
Neat.
So she and my mother really, she had much more direct contact, and I was hoping that hoping at some point you will be able to talk to her, because she had much more day-to-day contact with my mother during those years of 1970 to 75, and camped with my mother a lot. So she has stories about my mother that would really fill out who my mother was in terms of that aspect of her professional life. But she helped my mother through that addiction process, helped my mother get off the pain pills and back on her feet. And the second surgery with the broken hip worked, and then she did the probably crowning achievement in her life physically. She got herself back on her feet and hiked around Mount Rainier.
Wow.
And she was then 58 or 59.
Okay.
So
Without a broken hip.
without a
that's even
broken hip,
impressive.
a healed broken hip, she was proud of that, having done this, I guess, a week and a half or 2 weeks on the trail around. There's some trail that goes around Mount Rainier, and she did that and was very proud of that. So she had recovered from the hip, and she was out on her doing the activities that she loved to do, and then tragically she got a brain tumor. So in the spring of 1976, less than a year later, after her hip and recovering from the hip and getting active again, she got a brain tumor and very quickly deteriorated, and by July was in a full coma and passed away November, almost on the day of her 60th birthday.
Wow. Pretty young. Yeah.
So she was, whenever she was up for it and capable of doing it, which was almost all of her life, she was very energetic, very active, just had a perpetual smile on her face.
That's great.
Just loved doing what she loved doing, loved the people she was with, just enjoyed participating, particularly with young people. Always was an educator, always reached out to the people that would cross her path and join her. And this activity, we have a picture of her standing at the end of the canyon, and we rushed out this morning, and I didn't bring the stupid thing we will mail it to you.
Okay.
Of her standing at the end of the canyon, I think it's at the end of, this is the Yakima end?
That's the Yakima end.
Right, and this is the
Yeah.
Ellensburg end. Yeah, I think she's right somewhere, as I recall, that the road curves up and it's some spot where you can look down onto the river. She is standing there, and she's obviously just ridden the canyon on her bike. And she's doing her thing, and I didn't know anything about this. This was one of her activities that I never heard about. And so when this thing cropped up 8 or 10 years ago,
yeah.
what is this about? I mean, I knew that the highway went over,
Yeah.
and I never knew that she had been one of the people amongst a variety of people that wanted to turn this beautiful stretch of river into some sort of recreational area. And now you and Jill and a bunch of other people have carried this thing on, and it's just...
Well, I don't know if you know this, but through some of the research that I did at at the park that is now named after your mother, she had plans for a recreational park there that had a tennis court and other various activities at that park.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a picture of her with the with the plans of it, and I'll see if I can find those and show those to you.
Well, she was, that's another piece that, she was a very good tennis player when she was in her teens and 20s. And in fact, again, I walk out on a limb saying this, I think she was close to being state ranked when she was at WSU, and played on the tennis team, and she was, and she taught my brother and I, along with skiing, she taught us tennis very early. And so my brother and I were, in fact, I think my brother continues to play tennis quite a bit. I don't. But she was quite an active tennis player during those years of her teenage and early 20s.
Yeah.
So the tennis court would fit right in.
Yeah.
She was always eager to get people out of the tennis court.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's wonderful.
yeah, so I don't know what else I share about.
So I'm assuming education was a very important part of her life since, I mean, she has her doctorate, both of you have your doctorates. Was she a strong driver in encouraging the two of you to continue your education?
Absolutely. She always would say things such as, you know, you should get yourself as educated as you can, because nobody can take that away from you. Once you're educated, once you've been trained to do something, and she believed in strongly, and I think her father, well, I mean, she went to graduate college, and she started college at WSU at 32 or 33. So she finished her bachelor's degree in 37, 38. She went immediately into teaching, and was always, I mean, there's a variety of stories which are really kind of touching to me in a profound way. I have a letter from my grandmother to her when she was 10, and a letter that said, now, dear Helen, you listen to your brother. Young ladies should not be out hitchhiking.
She started young.
Yeah, you should not be hitchhiking. It's dangerous out there. Now you allow Lewis, her brother, who she hitchhiked. She went from Mount Vernon apparently at 10 years of age. Hitchhiked from Mount Vernon to the town south of Mount Vernon, 30, 40 miles south to I forget the name of the little town that he lived in. And apparently there was a railroad that she could come back on. And so Lewis was going to take her down to the railroad and make sure that the woman at the railroad station put her on the train so she couldn't hitchhike back home. And you do what Lewis says now, Helen. Now I know you'll listen to me. And so I have this letter at home. It's a really touching letter, and there's other pictures of her. We'll send these pictures to you because they're just adorable. She's with her brothers and sister. She has one sister and 3 brothers. She is obviously, she's like 10. You look at her as she's sitting, she just looks like she's okay, I gotta take this picture and then I gotta do something. I gotta run someplace, because she's like at 10, she's just ready to move. And another, what was the other story? There was another story that was, well, a variety of other stories that just kind of pop into my mind. In terms of her father, she was very attached to her father. Her father and she were very close. And when automobiles began to become popular and available to people like my grandfather, he would drive he would drive this automobile, and she would have to tell him, no, Dad, you don't pull back on the steering wheel to stop the truck. You put the foot on the brake, because he would grab the steering wheel, and he would say, whoa. So making the transition from a horse and buggy to an automobile, like I'm attempting to make transitions from dial telephones to cell phones. It's equally complicated. She has those kind of stories, and there was this very rich relationship between my grandfather and my mother, and she was the youngest, and I think he had mellowed a bit. He was a bit of a tough guy to the brothers, who were all older, and my mother, I think, was kind of his shining star, and he kind of really looked at her, and so I think that was where she got a lot of her sparkle in her eye. She was kind of the sparkle in his eye, and she carried that on, and it was just the memory of her is she would see people and just get excited by seeing them and be excited by their activities, and she would always want to know. She would always ask me things like, "A penny for your thoughts?" And I would be sitting there grumpy going, "14, but I want to talk to you." And so she was always asking me about what I thought about, what was going on in my mind. She was always curious, and I'm sure she did that with the students she taught. So education, you're right, was a big part of her life, and she just enjoyed to see people learn and have fun and having a good time. And that's one of the things I will now say to anybody who listens to me. Are you having fun? And in fact, one of the reasons I'm out here is I'm doing this ride around Mount Rainier, which in a sense is related to my mother, because she hiked around. Well, I've done it 3 times before, and it's 150 miles, and it's in one day, and we leave from Enumclaw right around the mountain, and it'll be on Thursday. It's called the Ramrod. And I'll do this ride, and at the end of the ride, I'll be thinking to myself, man, that was so much fun. But I have really struggled. And in fact, just the other day, I was preparing for this ride, and I was riding, and I was stopped at a stoplight, and a friend of mine was running up the road, and I said, "Hey, Steve, how are you doing?" And he said, "Steve, it's good to see you." And he says, "How's the things going?" And I said, "I'm having fun." And he said, "That's the bottom line." And that really comes right out of my mother. She just wanted everybody to have a good time, and life was really a kick for her. That it got cut short is a tragedy, but the 59 years that she did live, she brought a lot to a lot of people.
And it sounds like she didn't waste any time.
She was, get out of my way, I got things to do. So
that's great. Well, if you could pick like one memory or way that she influenced your life, what would that be? One of your favorite memories?
Probably just the happiness that she had in living. She was just excited about what she was doing, and everything she entered into. Once she began to find herself, and I think, unfortunately, the relationship with my father really kind of dampened it down for a bit. But once she began to see that she really enjoyed this or that, she just enjoyed the people she related to, the students she related to, her friends, the community, the canyon.
Yeah.
So she said to me, in some ways directly, but oftentimes much more metaphorically, be everything you can be and enjoy it, have a good time.
That's great.
Yeah. Which is what recreation's all about.
Yeah.
She wants people to have a good time in the canyon. She loved the canyon, and she wanted people to have a good time.
Great. Well, I think that's a perfect spot to end.
Okay.
Well,
Should have